Thank you. Mr. Speaker, this rules package makes very clear what the Republican majority will not do in the 119th Congress. After presiding over the 118th Congress and enacting the least amount of legislation in history signed into law that actually benefits the American people, Republicans want to continue that tradition by fast-tracking 12 bills that do nothing to lower costs or raise wages for the American people. None of the bills prioritized in this package take on the biggest corporations and wealthiest individuals who profit from the high prices and junk fees and corporate concentration that's harming Americans across this country. Because guess what? These corporations and wealthy individuals are the ones that are controlling the Republican Party for their own benefit. Just look at the combined wealth of the individuals that Donald Trump has nominated for this cabinet. A total wealth of over $450 billion with a B dollars. And with all those conflicts of interest present and the ethics scandals of numerous Republican members, perhaps that's why this Republican majority no longer wants an Office of Congressional Ethics. That's right, they want to jettison ethics for, quote, conduct. This package tries to fool the American people by scapegoating immigrants and trans people in the hopes that it will distract you from the fact that the first move of Republicans in the 119th Congress is to do absolutely nothing to help you and your family build a better life. Vote no, and I yield back.
5 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Jayapal.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Laken Riley was, by all accounts, a remarkable young woman whose life was tragically cut short by a horrific act that should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. My heart goes out to her family and loved ones who grieve her death. And I understand, as a mother myself, fully why, in the face of such senseless violence, especially against someone so young, there is an urge to do something, anything, to feel like you are actually helping to fix the problem. Unfortunately, this bill does nothing to fix the immigration system or to prevent future tragedies like this. It is simply an attempt to score cheap political points off of a tragic death. And in the process, it unfairly sweeps up many more innocent lives with no due process. So let us be clear. This is the Republican playbook over and over again. Scare people about immigrants. Never propose anything that actually solves an outdated and arcane immigration system that desperately needs Congress to allocate resources and update legal pathways to make the immigration system work for everyone. My Republican colleagues simply want to preserve a broken immigration system as a campaign issue so that they can scapegoat and demonize immigrants, all to distract the American people from their real goals of making working people pay for another Republican tax scam that benefits billionaires and the wealthiest. Just look at the rules package that they just passed. Out of the 12 bills included in that, not a single one does anything to secure the border, to fix the broken immigration system, to lower costs for working people, to address the housing crisis, tackle the extraordinary levels of income inequality in this country, or tamp down on inflation. Those were the promises of the Trump campaign, but not a single one of those things is actually included in the first bills that they are bringing to the floor without hearings. So let's talk about what this bill actually does. This bill goes far beyond subjecting those who are convicted to or admit to committing a theft offense to mandatory detention. What this bill actually does is subject any undocumented immigrant to mandatory detention for merely being arrested or charged with committing an act of theft, larceny, or shoplifting, along with those who are convicted or who admit to committing such acts. So under this bill, a DACA or a TPS recipient could be subjected to mandatory detention for crimes that are extremely low level or for something that's not even a crime, without even having had a fair day in court, without a conviction. So let's be clear, we are talking about people who have been in this country for decades. Many of us in Congress are parents. Imagine your child is with a group of kids grabbing an after-school snack at a 7-Eleven, and one of them chooses to just snitch a little candy bar off the shelf. The shop owner calls the police, and all the kids are arrested for shoplifting. If your child is a DACA recipient, someone who has lived here nearly their entire life, they are now subject to mandatory detention under this bill. Unfortunately, there are countless real-life examples of people getting wrongfully arrested for crimes that they didn't commit. In 2019, a man in New Jersey was arrested for shoplifting and trying to hit a police officer with a car because facial recognition software falsely identified him as the perpetrator. He spent 10 days in jail, even though he was actually 30 miles away from where the crime was committed. If he had been a DACA or a TPS recipient and this bill had been enacted, he would be subject to mandatory immigration detention, even though he was innocent of the crime of which he was accused. People deserve to have their day in court and are innocent until proven guilty. That seems to be something that the majority has forgotten or doesn't seem to care about unless the alleged criminal is the president-elect. The upcoming administration is poised to bring back their no priority immigration enforcement priority guidelines, in which a convicted murderer would be the same priority for deportation as an undocumented mom who has been living in this country for 20 years. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, how much money a sweeping mandatory detention proposal like this will cost the federal government at a time.
His time has expired.
I yield the gentlelady 30 seconds additional.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, I yield her 1 minute.
Thanks.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Imagine how much money a sweeping mandatory detention proposal like this will cost the federal government at a time when Republicans are talking a big game about cutting budgets. But not this one. Why? Because this is a great boon to those for-profit detention companies who make enormous profits from mandatory detention when there are far more effective and cheaper ways to address the issue. And who pays for all of this? The taxpayers. Even in a Republican trifecta, ICE has limited resources to detain and remove folks. But in this bill, like President Trump's enforcement priorities, we seek to use those resources on people who committed low-level crimes or even no crime at all. That makes no one safer and costs a lot of money. Finally, this bill also bizarrely attempts to give state attorneys generals the authority to try and stop administrations from carrying out important policy priorities by giving them standing to sue in federal court under various sections of the Immigration and Nationality Act. That entire section of the bill, likely unconstitutional. So I urge my colleagues to vote no on this overly broad, deeply flawed legislation, and I yield back.
We reserve.
The gentleman reserves. Again, members are reminded to refrain.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 5 minutes now to the distinguished gentlelady from the state of Washington, Ms. Jayapal.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Here we are, once again, with my Republican colleagues bringing a bill to the floor that does absolutely nothing to address the needs of the American people. My Republican colleagues made lots of campaign promises to lower costs for everyday Americans, but not a single bill so far has done anything like that. Instead, this week appears to be a week where they say they are protecting women, and yet their actions tell a different story. Today, we're discussing a bill that takes the Violence Against Women Act, a bill meant to protect victims of domestic violence, and weaponizes it against, you've got it, domestic violence victims. That is exactly why 200 local and national advocacy organizations for survivors of domestic violence from across the country with deep expertise in this area have come out so strongly to oppose this bill. I'm talking about the National Task Force to End Sexual and Domestic Violence, the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence, the National Network to End Domestic Violence, the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence, and groups that serve domestic violence survivors in more than 40 states across the country. Now, I want to be very clear once again. In our current laws, those who are convicted or admit to domestic violence or crimes listed in this bill are already deportable and inadmissible to the country. There is actually no gap in the law that needs to be fixed. Instead, in a perverse move, this bill would make it easier to label survivors of domestic violence as perpetrators, to make them removable from the country and eliminate existing legal safeguards that protect survivors. This is once again a bill that widens the highway to Donald Trump's mass deportation plans. I want to talk through an example. The police show up to a domestic violence call. The victim was attacked by her abuser, and she fought back in self-defense. Maybe the abuser has some scratches on his face. It is common practice for the police to arrest both parties in that situation when responding to a domestic violence incident. The police write a report describing how the victim hit her abuser in self-defense. Under this bill, that is an admission constituting the elements of domestic violence, and this woman is now inadmissible and subject to deportation, even if she is never charged, even if a judge later rules that she did not commit any crime. That so-called admission in the police report that she responded in self-defense to hit her abuser, that is enough to make her inadmissible under this bill. And that is, again, why more than 200 advocacy organizations for domestic violence survivors, deeply ensconced in the material of what happens every day across the country, far too often, those groups are all deeply opposed to this legislation. They know that this expansive bill that eliminates the existing safeguards for domestic violence survivors will harm those exact survivors and create a chilling effect for reporting future crimes, empowering abusers to go after immigrant women and children. Right now, we're only talking about immigrant survivors, but is this bill the start of a dangerous road watering down protections for all victims of domestic violence that are across the country? Who is next? The Violence Against Women Act is a landmark piece of legislation, a testament to a time when Democrats and Republicans could actually come together and legislate on issues of fundamental importance to this nation, despite our differences. The initial iteration of VAWA passed the House by voice vote. Can you imagine that? It passed by voice vote. It reshaped how we as a country talk about gender-based violence and how we treat survivors. The Violence Against Women Act recognized that we cannot be serious about eliminating violence against women if we are not equally serious about eradicating violence against everyone, regardless of immigration status. There are so many reasons why individuals in domestic violence situations are unjustly forced into the criminal legal system. We've seen the data. Too often, survivors are arrested alongside their abuser, and they're charged and even convicted of crimes involving violence, which later prove to be in self-defense or unjustly charged. This bill makes it more likely that we harm the very people we want to protect. One more minute.
I grant the gentlelady an extra minute.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Here's the cruel irony. In the same week that Republicans are putting forth the nomination of a defense secretary who won't even say that sexual assault is disqualifying, Republicans want to fool you into thinking that they care about domestic violence and sexual assault survivors. Please. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. Despite VAWA's bipartisan history, we now have to fight tooth and nail to reauthorize it. It was Republicans who let the Violence Against Women Act languish and expire for 3 years. And the leader of the Republican Party is once again a man who was found liable for sexual misconduct and bragged about grabbing and forcibly kissing women without their consent. Last year, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of VAWA's enactment. But today, we have to watch our colleagues across the aisle make another cheap attempt to divide us and play gotcha politics. We should be working together to eradicate domestic violence. I have a bill, the WISE Act, that would strengthen protections for survivors. I wish we could do that here, not this harmful, misleading bill. I urge my...
Minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Remember when candidate Trump said that on day one he would end inflation, he would bring prices down for American citizens? That is, in fact, the number one reason he got elected. But guess what? He has done nothing on this. Republicans have spent no time on the floor trying to bring down prices for average Americans. And in fact, the data that was just released yesterday says that prices have shot up because of many of the proposals that Donald Trump has put forward and the chaos he is inflicting on the economy. Are we spending time on that here on the floor? Nope. We're wasting time on yet another attack on all immigrants, including U.S. citizens. Once again, the majority is moving a bill to expand the Trump administration's mass deportation machine and trample on the core American principle of due process. All of these bills that are being put forward utilize a very simple formula. First, take laws that are already on the books about deporting and making inadmissible to the United States people who are convicted of committing certain crimes and fool the American people into thinking somehow that's not already the law. Second, dangerously expand those laws so that simply being accused of something or admitting to something that no one would reasonably consider being a crime makes it sufficient to now deport you or make you inadmissible without any due process, without a fair day in court. This is terrorizing communities across the country. And Donald Trump's obsession with using every lever of government to target immigrants has undermined our national security and our safety by forcing federal law enforcement officials to abandon fighting drug trafficking or human smuggling and instead focusing on arresting, detaining, and deporting immigrants who pose no threat to public safety and many of whom have lived and worked in this country for decades. Already, we've seen the effects on U.S. citizens with the unlawful detention of U.S. citizens, the targeting of Native Americans, the arrest of countless people with no criminal records. ICE agents are treating the act of speaking Spanish as a probable cause for interrogation. And they are revoking all the crucial and successful legal pathways put in place by the Biden administration, like parole and temporary protected status, including, by the way, for Venezuelans and Cubans who feel Trump's betrayal deeply. This bill follows the same divisive, deceptive formula. H.R. 35 amends the Immigration and Nationality Act to create a new ground of deportability and inadmissibility for any non-citizen who admits fleeing from Border Patrol while operating a motor vehicle, whether or not they knew it was Border Patrol that they were fleeing from. Now, let's be clear. Just as I said with the formula, being convicted of fleeing Border Patrol or any law enforcement already makes a person deportable and admissible. That is current law. But the key word here is convicted. Remember that when we talk about deportability, we're also talking about people who are in the United States lawfully. Many are green card holders and have lived in the United States for decades. So if we're going to deport them, I hope that we would all agree they should have basic due process rights and a day in court, just like any American would want for themselves. That is why conviction is required for deportation. Convictions also mean that law enforcement can focus on the most serious criminals, not those who are simply accused and may well be innocent. Let me also debunk the Republican argument that admitting to fleeing is the same as a conviction. That's simply not true. People may admit to fleeing without even knowing that the person chasing them is Border Patrol. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you're a woman driving alone on a deserted road at night. You hear a siren, you see an unmarked car behind you signaling that you should pull over. You've heard many stories about the men who prey on solo female drivers by pretending to be law enforcement. So you slow down, you put on your hazards, you even call 911 to confirm that they have an officer in the area. They confirm that one of their officers, who's deputized by CBP, is in the area. So you pull over, and when the officer comes up to your window, you say, "I'm sorry, officer, I needed to keep driving while I confirmed that you were with law enforcement since you're in an unmarked car." That constitutes an admission that you were intentionally fleeing law enforcement. And under this bill, even if you're a lawful permanent resident who has been in this country for 10 years or 20 years, you have just rendered yourself deportable. A conviction requirement importantly ensures that you have due process and that you don't miss essential context. Just last week, the Washington Post reported an uptick in people who are impersonating immigration enforcement officers to harass and attack people they suspect of being undocumented. One North Carolina man showed a woman a fake badge and told her that he would deport her if she didn't come to a motel and have sex with him. He ended up being arrested and charged with impersonating law enforcement, kidnapping, second-degree forcible rape, and assault. But in this environment, it is not surprising that people keep driving away when unmarked cars tell them to pull over, claiming to work with Border Patrol. U.S. citizens should also be aware of the fact that the new criminal penalties in this bill would subject U.S. citizens to draconian mandatory minimums for something as minor as failing to immediately stop when hailed by an unmarked police car. And the bill applies to anyone.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
I can yield the gentlelady another 20 seconds.
Thank you. This bill applies to anyone within 100 miles of the border. That's 2/3 of the population of the United States. Cities like Jacksonville, Charleston, Green Bay, Wisconsin, Grand Forks, North Dakota, and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So fear is already pervasive. People are afraid to go to work and schools. Businesses are hurting. Local economies and communities in states from Nebraska to Ohio to Texas are hurting. This bill plays on fear. It's cruel. It's unnecessary. It's dangerous for all Americans' due process rights. Vote no. I yield back.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, this bill is a Republican betrayal of the middle class, of working families across the country. If you are at home watching this, I want you to think about what Republicans want to slash from your life so that they can lower taxes for the biggest corporations and wealthiest billionaires like Elon Musk. They want to cut a minimum, the floor, of $880 billion from Medicaid, which covers health care for 72 million Americans. Medicaid pays for nursing homes for 5 out of 8 seniors across the country, pays for health care for 38 million kids, including over 3 million kids in Texas and 1.2 million kids in Ohio. In fact, it pays for 64% of childbirths in Speaker Mike Johnson and Majority Leader Steve Scalise's home state of Louisiana. Any Republican who votes for this resolution is voting for those cuts, as well as devastating cuts to nutrition and Medicare. Don't listen to Republicans who try to say that Medicaid won't be touched. I introduced an amendment to protect Medicaid, which they blocked during our budget markup because they intend to cut Medicaid. Remember when Donald Trump said that he would tackle inflation and lower costs on day one? Well, here we are, a month in, and prices are rising. Musk has taken a literal chainsaw to tens of thousands of jobs, putting families and local economies at risk. This budget resolution makes it clear that the only people that Republicans are willing to fight for in this country are the wealthy.
The lady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to H.R. 1526, a bill that would prohibit district courts from issuing nationwide injunctions. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle want you to believe that somehow these nationwide injunctions being issued by courts across the country against Donald Trump's illegal and unconstitutional actions are unfair. Well, here's the message. If you don't like the injunctions, don't do illegal, unconstitutional stuff. That simple. Nationwide injunctions play an essential role in protecting our democracy and holding the political branches accountable. Without them, thousands or millions of people could be harmed by these illegal or unconstitutional government policies. Just look at Donald Trump's attempt to end birthright citizenship. In a lawsuit brought in my home state of Washington, a Reagan-appointed federal judge, not a Democratic-appointed federal judge, a Reagan-appointed federal judge ruled that the order was, quote, blatantly unconstitutional because the 14th Amendment plainly states that, quote, all persons born in the United States are U.S. citizens. What's next? Stripping citizenship from U.S. citizens? That's in the Trump extremist playbook as well. So is apparently kidnapping and disappearing people, including those with legal status, without any due process, or getting rid of entire departments established by Congress, or suppressing freedom of speech and dissent. These are the hallmarks of an authoritarian who wants to hold all power. And the courts are doing what they are supposed to do, issuing nationwide injunctions against this kind of abuse of power. Somehow my colleagues never complained about nationwide injunctions when dozens were issued against former Presidents Obama and Biden. But now that it's against Donald Trump, they want to rig the rules to give the president free rein to do whatever he wants, regardless of whether it is illegal or unconstitutional. Well, get this.
Recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Republican Majority Leader said, "You can be what you want in America." That's what he said. But you can't be what you want in Republicans' America. Factually, the top 1% of billionaires and millionaires in America are worth more than the 291 million Americans, 90% of the country, because we're rigging the economy against them. That's what Republicans are doing. 801 U.S. billionaires have $6 trillion of wealth, and now Republicans want to give a $4.5 trillion tax cut to the wealthiest billionaires. That's what Donald Trump said. You're rich as hell. We're going to give you more tax cuts. And on the backs of working Americans, because voting yes for this resolution is voting for a minimum of $880 billion cuts to Medicaid. That's health care taken away from 72 million Americans. That's nursing homes taken away for 5 out of 8 seniors. And that's health care taken away for 38 million kids. Vote no on this disastrous Republican resolution.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I reserve.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
I would remind the gentleman this bill will kick 404,000 people in Ohio off their health insurance. I now yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Washington, as a distinguished member of the Budget Committee, Ms. Jayapal.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is a massive betrayal of working people and poor people across America. It strips at least 14 million Americans of their health care. It slashes food for the hungry, and it cuts basic needs for Americans across the country. And why? So that you can give a $5 trillion tax break to the wealthiest billionaires like Elon Musk. If you had a giant corporate lobby outside, you get a tax break. If you're in the top 0.1%, 0.1% of billionaires, you get a $398,000 tax break. If you're a millionaire, you get an average $83,000 tax break. But if you're a working person or a poor person, you are SOL. You get kicked off your health care. You don't get the $2 a meal in SNAP benefits, and you get hungrier, you get poorer, you get sicker. And here's the thing.
Reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Yes, and I will yield 7 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from the state of Washington, who's the ranking member of the Immigration Subcommittee on the Judiciary Committee, Ms. Jayapal.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 3486. This bill is Republicans' latest attempt to scapegoat and fearmonger about immigrants. With President Trump's poll numbers tanking on immigration due to his kidnapping and disappearing of immigrants and U.S. citizens off our streets, House Republicans are once again looking to turn the conversation back to immigration and the border. Let me point out the absurdity of spending this valuable floor time on a bill that has harsh, ineffective, mandatory minimums for immigrants, while the majority affects one of the greatest cover-ups of our time, covering up the horrific abuses of Jeffrey Epstein and his network of child traffickers and sexual predators. Why not spend our time focused on justice for the incredibly brave survivors who have spoken out against the rich and powerful men that abuse them? Why fight a bipartisan discharge petition from Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna to release all the damn files, not just the ones that the Trump's DOJ allows to be released? Why not speak out against the cushy deal that Ghislaine Maxwell just got from Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche to move to a cushy prison instead of serving her time as one of Epstein's main co-conspirators and groomers of young girls to be abused by Epstein and his cohort of rich and powerful men. Obviously, once again, my colleagues across the aisle want to try and distract us by returning to their tried and true playbook of demonizing immigrants. That is not actually what the American people want. We have seen over and over again the American people actually support immigration, despite all the lies that come from the other side. This summer, a Gallup poll noted a record high 79% of U.S. adults saying immigration is a good thing for the country. A Pew poll showed 60% of Americans disapprove of President Trump's suspension of most asylum applications, which was ruled unlawful in federal court. The American people now see that the Trump administration has continually lied about what they're going to do on immigration. According to a CBS poll, a majority of Americans believe that the Trump administration is not prioritizing the removal of dangerous criminals and public safety threats, and nearly 60% disapprove of how the Trump administration is using immigration detention facilities. This is not surprising in the least. As the ranking member said, ICE's own data revealed that roughly 65% of people in immigration detention have zero criminal convictions. Zero. It is clear that this administration is not targeting the so-called worst of the worst, as President Trump claimed on the campaign trail. Instead, they are targeting everyone they think they may be able to deport. Tom Homan, the president's so-called border czar, said that arresting non-criminals is, quote, our job. In Los Angeles, ICE has been racially profiling people, indiscriminately arresting and holding people, causing fear and terror in people of all legal statuses who simply look Latino or speak Spanish or congregate on certain corners. Today's bill is just more of the same scapegoating and lying about immigrants. Once again, the majority implies that somehow we don't already have consequences for unlawful entry and reentry. That is absolutely false. Current law already includes harsh sentences and are some of the most prosecuted laws in our country every single year. This bill would add ridiculous mandatory minimum sentences, going up to life potentially, onto the crimes of unlawful entry and reentry. Now, this makes no sense on multiple levels. If the administration is seeking to deport, quote, the worst of the worst, why put them in incarceration facilities? Perhaps this is just another ploy to give private for-profit prison companies more money so they can build more facilities, make more profit, and ultimately contribute more to the Republican campaign coffers. In addition, as the ranking member said in his statement, mandatory minimums just do not work. We have actually seen this over and over again. Harsh enforcement is not the answer. I don't know why my colleagues are having such a hard time with this. The first Trump administration actually tried to weaponize unlawful entry prosecutions by separating over 5,000 children from their parents. The entire country, Republican, Independent, and Democrat, was horrified at this, and the administration ultimately had to abandon their family separation policy. But still today, over 1,000 of these kids remain separated from their parents. And yet, despite this despicable, absurdly cruel policy, a 2018 study found zero statistically significant relationship between the family separation policy and the number of apprehensions at the border. These kinds of indiscriminate, harsh enforcement efforts are a waste of taxpayer dollars and detrimental to the kind of country that we are trying to create. The U.S. already has the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world, and it costs U.S. taxpayers about $182 billion every year, not to mention the social cost to lock up nearly 1% of the adult population. This bill would skyrocket that number. Now, actually, it was during the first Trump term that Republicans joined Democrats in actually rolling back some mandatory minimum sentences in the First Step Act that was signed by, guess who? President Donald Trump. himself in 2018. But I guess all good policy is once again falling to the feet of the divisive political rhetoric around immigrants and crime that my colleagues across the aisle have embraced as their salvo to save them from the bleak economic picture our country faces today. Higher joblessness, Trumpflation, a host of reckless policies, including trade wars, that have cost the American people. The Republican big bad betrayal bill is unpopular everywhere in the country, no matter how you spin it, because Americans know that kicking 17 million Americans off of health care just so you can give a $7 trillion tax break to the wealthiest billionaire donors and giant corporations is outrageous, and the American people want us to roll it back.
Additional 30 seconds.
In just 19 days, government funding expires. Right now, Americans across the country face rural hospitals that are closing, higher prices for back-to-school supplies, double-digit increases in healthcare premiums, and the Republican majority, what are we spending our time on? This terrible bill. What a giant abdication of the huge responsibility that the American people put on us here in Congress. I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, and I yield back.